If there's one thing that we can say fairly definitively about the Christmas season that is kind of on point and weird at the same time, it's Christmas is the time for ghost stories. We love good ghost stories around Christmas. And this is an old tradition that goes back quite a ways. There are a lot of Christmas ghost stories, the most famous of which, of course, is A Christmas Carol. But we see them all throughout the season. Horror movies come out more around Christmas than they do around Halloween. Maybe that's trying to tell us. Because in the darkness of the cold winter night, the ancestors are out there. And since we're kind of locked in our houses away from the cold, it's a good time to deal with some of that energy. Let's talk about how to heal and find the light in these dark times through ancestor practice as we walk together down creation.
Intro.
Hello everyone, my name is Charlie. I am a Christopagan Druid and priest of Bridget.
Hello everyone, my name is Brian. I am a Christopagan Druid and sous chef to the Dodja.
Today we're going to be talking yet again about ancestor worship and ancestor practice. If you are interested in this topic, we have done quite a few episodes about this, especially in October leading up to Samhain. If you want more, you can always head back into the archives and find a lot of what we've said about this. We try not to repeat ourselves, so if we forget to explain something, you can always ask in the comments and we will try to do better going forward, because we only have a little bit of time together, so we try to just keep building on what we've done before. But before we get into all that, if you haven't already, don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow whatever the terminology happens to be on whatever app you are listening to us on. We do 5 original Christopagan and Druid episodes 5 days a week from Monday to Friday. And you don't want to miss a thing because we got a lot of fun stuff going. All right, let's just get into it. Sister work is weird. I feel like a lot of people are probably going to start looking into this more with the advent of Dune Prophecy, which has been really heavily leaning into the Bene Gesserit waking their ancestral mothers and their ancestral lines. And I've noticed the correlation between pop culture things happening and people going, is it a thing? So if you are here from that, yes, no, maybe, and don't be a Bene Gesserit, they're bad.
Yeah.
All Bene Gesserits are evil, no exceptions, period, dot. Okay, so
Read the books.
read the books. Yes, we can connect to our ancestral lines. And just a little bit of recap, just to make sure we're all on the same page. When we are talking about our ancestral lines, we were talking about our ancestors of land, those who lived on the land that we live on before we did. Our ancestors of blood, which are our lineage, tracing back through our parents, all the way back to the first single-cell organisms on Earth. Your ancestors, yes, do include fish and cynodonts and all kinds of things in there that you may not think of as ancestors, but are. And your milk line of ancestors, which are all of those who have formed you and helped to make you who you are today, whether that's your found family, some poet that has really meant something to you, a mystic, a teacher, what have you. All of those people that helped to make you who you are in your milk line of ancestors.
In the spirit of Ralphie, the wisest among us,
My ancestor was a sickle cell amoeba. It's an amoeba, but yeah, I see what you're saying.
I just had that going through my head. Thought I'd share the joy.
So when you're dealing with your ancestors, first of all, if you are living on colonized land, like I know a lot of our listeners are, because I can see the demographics, there's a lot of trauma in the ancestors of the land, unless you happen to be of indigenous descent. And I don't mean of indigenous descent because your great aunt once told you that you had some definite indigenous blood in the family. You know that you are. Because there have been legends in my family that one of my great grandmothers was Native American, and I can't find her. The great grandmother that I found does not appear to be Native American and appears to be quite Irish. That's a legend that got written into my family that I grew up with my entire life. It does not appear to be true. A lot of us have these stories.
While we're on the technical kick, even if you actually are of indigenous descent, the trauma of the land may still impact you as well from your ancestors, because they might be mad that you didn't do something, mad that you did do something. It's family drama.
It actually might be worse because the land that you're on probably isn't the land of your ancestors,
Because
because forced migrated and ethnically cleansed so much of this country that, let's just say, doing land work is always going to be problematic because let's just say you're British, the king of all colonizers. Well, here's the thing. We don't actually know much about the first peoples that moved into the British Isle there, onto Britain, but we do know that successive waves of Celtic people came in and took over the land, and that's where you get the Brythonic people and the Welsh people and eventually the Scottish people, which were a side invasion from the Irish over on the other island over there that conquered the northern part of the island when they were ruling the Isle of Man, which is yet another land that got colonized. And then the Angles came in and colonized a whole bunch of stuff. And then the Saxons came in and colonized a whole bunch of stuff. And then the Normans came in and colonized a whole bunch of stuff. And I completely skipped over all of the Viking raids that did the same thing. Your blood ancestors and the ancestors of the land that you were on.
So many colonizings.
I wanted to use that as an example
Yeah.
because it's easy to think of Britain as kind of always has been, but permanent thinking has to go away. Even British people and British identity is a new thing, and some of the land trauma that you may be facing from the ancestors of the land might be from something that happened in a Viking raid 1,000 years ago. That is energy that has still not been resolved.
I also find it interesting because when you're talking about ancestors and stuff, that right now a lot of the Britons get a bad rap for the colonizing acts from 1600s, 1700s, 1800s, so when they were in a mass colonizing the globe phase. But in a way, it's almost like that has been the tradition of the peoples from that region going all the way back. In a way, it's almost like that trauma has just been passed on.
It is,
and they passed it on globally.
Colonization developed and got worse over time. We know that at least 2, if not 3 migrations out of Africa, and they would have met and displaced each other and intermarried and all of those things. It's the nature of our species and most species, if we're being honest, that they come in and they take over the land that has the resources on it that they want. Chimpanzees have wars. We have seen this with orca and various other animals as well. Please do not exceptionalize humans. And humans are the only ones that have wars. Orca go to war. Chimpanzees go to war. We have ants go to war. It's about understanding the traumas that have happened on the land and making sure that you are not being influenced by those energies. This is one of the things that, to me, is the least talked about in ancestor work. That is the clean cut. There are some ancestral energies that we have to just cut ourselves off from. I know that there are several branches of my family tree that have, as far as my ancestor work, have been cut off. Or at least various individuals especially who have been cut off. I have some not so good people in my genealogy that are not welcome in our house and not welcome in our world. Dealing with that in a way that does not cause further problems is tricky and not something that anyone can do one podcast episode on and tell you how to do it, because it's really going to be an individual thing depending on how that spirit is, how active that spirit is, and how insistent that spirit is. So the remedies are not like, here's the one charm that you can put on your door that makes everything all better. That's not how this works.
The spirit might be like, okay, I'm good. Another time, that might tick it off, and that spirit becomes 10 times, 100 times more active and aggressive or violent in response to whatever that remedy is. Like, there's so many different reactions to that.
But when I say cutting off, I am not talking about forgetting. This is the other side of cutting ourselves off from that energy. I have one of my great grandfathers murdered 2 of his wives. Like, he murdered a wife, got a slap on the wrist, went to jail for I think 2 years, and got back out because women's lives have never really mattered in the law in our country, as we're seeing yet again right now. And murdered his second wife, got out of prison. I think he got 5 years for the second one. Married a third wife who found out about what happened to the first 2, and she grabbed the kids and ran before he could get her too. That man is not welcome in my family. Do you see what I'm saying? He is not part. He has been cut out of the lineage. He has dishonored my family. He has dishonored the line. He has dishonored the cow. He's dishonored all of it. Y'all know I like to quote Mushu. He's not welcome here. But that does not mean that I don't remember him, because remembering that trauma is important, because that's how you keep from repeating. A lot of what our country is going through is a problem with the ancestors right now. I don't want to talk too much about the election or any of the political things like that, because it's much more generalized than just the election. But I don't think the election would have gone the same way if a white male had been going up against Trump in the election. I don't think it would have gone the same way. We can look at the polls, we can look at the answers given to a lot of questions. There were a lot of assumptions made because of Massage Noir. There was a lot of assumptions made because of the color of her skin and her gender that were things that she was not running on. That is a problem with our ancestors. We are still suffering from this whole thing of we are not willing to listen to or trust Black people. We're not. And that's problematic. And just saying, well, I'm not that way. Great. Wonderful. Are you sure? Are you sure? Because that has been baked into the cake of our country for so long that it is infused in so many of our institutions, so many of our assumptions about various abilities. We see it in our fiction. We see it way too much in our fiction. It is still haunting us. It is the ghost that is haunting us. And for us individually, figuring out if there are specific people in our family that contributed to that can help us deal with any of that trauma that's in there. I think of my great-grandmother. I love my great-grandmother. My great-grandmother was one of the most racist people that I ever had in my life. She said things that I will never say, just in regular conversation, because that's how she was raised. That does not make it okay. I am not making any apologia for her. But when I deal with her in my lineage, I have to make sure that I'm safe. None of that racism and misogyny is allowed in my house. None of that is allowed in here. I have to acknowledge the sins of our past. This is where people get it confused, that we are not tainted by the sins of the past, but we welcome it in.
We often forget that you're always working with subtle energies, and we're working on multiple levels. For instance, when we're talking about that right relationship, it's not just you, it's a relationship. So it's you, it's the other person, and it's also probably several observers or other parties that aren't part of that two-person. You're actually dealing with the subtle energies of a group, because it's never just two people in a relationship. Their ancestors, the ancestors of the area, of the land, all of those subtle energies are still there in that interaction. So as Charlie was saying, even if you yourself are like, nope, not racist, I fixed and corrected all that, you're probably living on stolen land that still has some of those subtle energies fueling and feeding in. And to deny it only allows that to continue to foster and grow and contribute problems. Being aware of it allows you to defend against it, allows you to redirect those energies into something healthier, more productive, to heal it. Because as part of the healing process is to redirect it, reconstruct it into something more beneficial.
So for further down this line, right? Because I don't mind talking about some of my ancestral issues on here. My family live where they live now because they received a land grant after the Civil War. They fought on the side of the Union, and Union soldiers were granted a land grant, a homestead. Most of my ancestors homesteaded this region after the Civil War. This is the land that they were given by a country that didn't own the land. This land was owned by the Osage. They did not own this land. The government took this land and gave it to my ancestors. That's something that I think about a lot, especially because you cannot till the soil out here without finding arrowheads and other evidence of the indigenous population that used to live here. Like, it is so common today. My family have farmed a lot of this land for over 100 years. They have farmed this land, and you till the soil and there are arrowheads and other things that pop up still to this day. And so remembering that this land was given to us by somebody who did not own it in the first place matters. I have a big question mark in my history, and it has led me to do a lot of work personally on my feelings about law and order. The last person hung in this town that I live in was hung by one of my great-grandfathers for the murder of one of my other great-grandfathers. It was a Black man. I cannot find any real details about trial. I know that the Historical Society has pictures of all the crowds that gathered around to watch this man die, because that was a public spectacle. And I cannot tell you with any degree of certainty whether this was a judicial action or a lynching. I don't know. And learning this about my ancestry has led me on a path where I have looked a lot into how does the judiciary work? How do cases work? It led me on a path where I'm trying to correct that energy. Do you see what I'm saying? Because I don't know. This may have been that may have been the guy who did it. I still don't think you kill murderers like eye for an eye leaves everybody blind. I don't think that's the way to do it, right? But because I cannot say, there's not enough evidence for me to make a decision. And those pictures don't look judicial. I'll just say that. It hits me wrong when I see those pictures. Even if it was like he had a trial and the whole thing, it still something doesn't smell right. You do know what I'm saying? Like something feels wrong in the whole thing. And when you come upon those things, some people's instant reaction is shame. Why? Having shame over your ancestors is a weird thing for me because you had, no matter what anybody tells you, no control over your birth. I do believe that we come back from life to life, but I don't believe that we get to handpick the life that we get in the next life. I don't think that any of that happens. I think we all kind of go into the pot and get pulled out of the cauldron when it's time for a baby to be born, and that's how we get back into our bodies. Like, I do not believe we actively choose the lives we're going to have. I don't think I would have chosen the life of pain that I'm currently experiencing. Do you get what I'm saying? I don't think we get to choose our lives like that. And so I don't think it's ever right to say that we have any blame for what our ancestors did. Now, we do if we continue to perpetrate the actions that our ancestors did. And that's where you should feel shame, like shame bells and everything. And that's really the ancestor work that we could be doing right now. There are a lot of resources that we can use. It's gotten so much better and easier than others. This is not sponsored, and I have mixed feelings about all of them. So I am not going to name any of the websites because they all have shady people involved. So pick your poison. The poison's in the dose. You do you. But the resources are available for us to do that work if it is something we feel drawn to do. And that's the other thing. If you have a very tough relationship with your family, if you have been ostracized from your family and feel no connection to them, you have your ancestors of milk and you have your ancestors of land. You do not have to do anything with your bloodline ancestors. In fact, in the Kabbalistic tradition, your bloodline ancestors are the weakest ancestry you have because your soul gravitates towards others that you were closest to in that primordial beginning when souls came into being. You have a soul family and you have a bloodline family, and they are almost never the same thing, and we are generally drawn towards those that our souls have a higher affinity to. So don't feel any obligation to any of your ancestors of blood. I think we put too much priority on our ancestors of blood sometimes. It causes us to overlook or apologize or paper over many of the sins that our ancestors committed, or just to hand wave it away. Oh, times were different. Yeah, my great-grandmother was racist, and yeah, times were different, but Granny, you lived into the 1986. You could have done better. You didn't, but you could have. I get it. People can get set in their ways in a lot of things, but I know for a fact from my own personal life, you can change. Anyone can change. And so not letting ourselves hand wave that away.
This is also where that both and thinking comes in, because you don't just throw out the good things they did either and just cancel them because they were very racist or something. And you don't use, well, it was the times to excuse wrong behavior either. It's about setting the energies right. So you want to cultivate the good and put to rest the bad, or heal it if it can be healed.
Thich Nhat Hanh talks a lot about the seeds of enlightenment that have within us. And I have weird views about enlightenment. I've written a little bit about it over at wisdomscry.com. Probably going to be writing a lot more about it. I'm currently working on an essay and another essay titled What is a Druid, that I'm really grappling with this idea in there. We have all of these seeds in us, and all of us have kind of those seeds of rage and anger and violence, but we also have those seeds of compassion and joy and mercy and everything else. It's about which of those seeds we cultivate and which ones of those we just kind of put a little weed tarp over so that they don't grow. Or when we see them grow up, we prune them a little bit or try to pluck them out as best we can. And that is a very good way of thinking about ancestor work. We're not talking about some like Avatar the Last Airbender, or even do prophecies doing this as well, where you're invoking all of your ancestors and they're like all connected to you in this infinite web that starts at you and goes backwards in time, and you are kind of part of this great river. No, like your ancestors gave you seeds. And that garden analogy really does work well, especially as we're here in wintertime, because winter is the time where you start sorting through your seeds. What seeds are rotten and need to be thrown away? What seeds need to be dried better so that they don't go rotten and will be able to actually germinate in spring? Some seeds have to be treated in a special way so that they will germinate. So you got to start that process also in winter. Some seeds, they need to be started way early so that they are ready to be planted in spring. And so this is that time while we're here in our houses, not often going out because of the cold and the snow and the what have you. Or if you're in the Southern Hemisphere, from what I hear from some of the people I know down there, because of the heat and the fires and the everything else, the dust storms and what have you. But whatever it is, now is the time to weed through that. Literally, weed through that. Find out what is the wheat and what are the tares. If you're not familiar with that story, that's one of Jesus's parables of the wheat and the tares, and that the devil goes around sowing tares in amongst the wheat. A tare is a plant that looks a lot like wheat, except for it doesn't give anything edible. It looks a lot like wheat, and if you're not careful, you'll think, oh, I've got a bunch of wheat growing, but you don't, because it's snuck in. The seeds look alike, the plants look alike. It's not till you get to the end of the process and it's time for them to start making the fruiting stalks that you go, oh, no, that's what a tare is. And that's what we're looking for here. Those seeds that some of which might look good. Maybe your ancestors left you a lot of money or a lot of land or a lot of this, that, or the other. That might look good. That might have been stolen. There might be a great crime in there. It may have been done on the backs of other people. And that doesn't mean that you have to give it all away. That doesn't mean that you have to do the, 100% altruistic thing. Because if we can accomplish anything in this podcast, one of the many things I want to do is to get rid of this idea of purity. There are many goals that I have, but we're never going to be pure. We may be able to get down to so many parts per billion bad traits in us, but purity is not what we're looking for, because purity is an illusion, because purity is, one, often lethal. Pure water is not good for you. You need a lot of the minerals and other things that are found in water to keep you healthy. So be very mindful of that. But also, purity is a standard that you set that you may be wrong about. We've had a lot of few purity rules over the years that have been wrong. Like, all fats are bad. No, some fats are necessarily. You need your omega-3s and your omega-6s. Not all fats are bad. Not all equally bad. All sugars are bad. No, not all sugars are bad. Some sugars are worse than others. But like everything in life, everything is on a spectrum. And purity is generally a myth, because there's always going to be some parts per billion of impurity in everything. So it's not even worth working for. But really taking that time to hone in. And ancestor work can be ritual work. It can be prayer work. It can be meditational work. It can be doing your family tree. It can be working on a quilt made out of clothes from your ancestors that you've kept, right? It might be reading that book that your grandmother used to read to you to somebody else. There are a lot of ways to do ancestor work and not get trapped into one path. But right now, especially with everything going on in our country, here in the United States, and a lot of countries around the world, now is a really good time to start doing that work of how can we spot, especially in our ancestors of the land, because people like to stop at the indigenous people that the colonizers pushed off. Yes, those are your ancestors of the land, but so are those people who colonized that land before you. Unless you're directly descended from the people who stole that land, there's colonizers in that land, and you got to deal with all of that energy too. And until we figure out how to not only deal with the subtle energy of that and how that kind of just affects us, but also just the psychic damage that has caused to our society, allowing us to see some people as more worthy than others when that everybody's the same. Nobody's more or less worthy than anybody else. That have allowed us to think that we have ownership rights over land, which, no, if anything, the land owns us. And every time we get too big in our britches about that, storms happen, earthquakes, floods happen, to remind you, no, that's not your land. That's the land's land, and the land's going to do with it whatever the land wants to do with it. right? But there are a lot of things that have been seeded into us. We might not even see it. Now's a good time to look through and try to find those seeds that you don't want in your garden next year.
I know we've gotten to this point. Some of you may still be wondering, why now? Why does all this happen around Christmas time? It's because the subtle energies. Many people are at this time of year, especially in the build up to Christmas, thinking about family, thinking about Christmas past, thinking about loved ones that may not be around anymore, or friends that aren't around anymore. They're already thinking about the ancestors and the people that are no longer here. And all that energy is building up on a massive scale. And many are doing it in an unaware state.
All year
And
round.
that is why this time of year, there is such a focus and such a prevalence of it.
All your aunts sitting around the table talking about great aunt so-and-so and great uncle so-and-so and grandma this and grandpa that, and sometimes using names that you've never heard before. It is part and parcel of that tradition that's come down to us. But I am not a natalist. I am not somebody who is all that interested in bloodlines for a lot of reasons. I think that's what's gotten us into too much trouble as a species, and especially in like some of the quote-unquote noble families that inbreeding will tell. Blood is not sacred like that. Blood is sacred because it is life. You lose your blood, you lose your life. Your bloodline, it really isn't as important as the land and the community that you'd foster together. You and your family can have the tightest knit family that is, but if you're in a collapsed society, doesn't really matter if you're not connected to the people. You know what I'm saying? Like, it is not the most important bond. And so think outside of that. And also just remember, like, are there special songs that remind you of these people? Whatever it is, old traditions that come in, certain foods that have been passed down. And like there's my grandmother's cheesecake, which is not really a cheesecake. It's just like lemon jello and Cool Whip, a little cream cheese in it. But it's not really like a cheesecake, but it reminds me of grandma. It reminds me of time with grandma. So it's something that connects me to some of those happy memories. So don't just do the hard work, because we're very prone to doing the hard work. And with everything going on in the world right now, my mind is very fixated on the hard work that we need to do to clear some of the racism and misogyny and misogynoir from our world. But you also have to find some of those moments of joy. I still find myself telling some of my grandpa Jake's jokes that half of them were incoherent. And that to me makes them better. Nobody else gets them. Nobody else laughs, because the punchline was usually him in his very gravelly voice giggling so hard you couldn't make out what the punchline was. But it was funny because he enjoyed telling the joke so much, you had to laugh. Like, you couldn't help but laugh. That's also part of my project this year, is, I was trying to bring Silly back. So, yeah, we need to do the hard work. We also need to do the fun work. But yeah, that's this time of year. How do you connect with your ancestors? How do you do that sorting? Have you ever thought about that? Because just because somebody is related to you doesn't mean that they get replanted in the garden. What are your thoughts? I'd love to know. You can let us know down in the comments. If you're listening to us on Spotify or YouTube, you can leave a comment right there. If you're listening to us anywhere else, even if they say you can leave a comment, they don't let us know. So you can leave a comment there because engagement is magic. But then head over to creationspaths.com, click on chat, and there you can leave us a comment, and we will be able to see it and get back to you. We really love hearing from you all. You all have some really interesting insights. I also really like it when you point out something that we say that you'd never heard of before. A lot of you have been doing that lately, where you're like taking a line out of something either Brian or I said, and like, oh, I never really thought about it like that. And that helps us too, because we want to be of service to the community. And if there are things that we take for granted, because a lot of that stuff that we kind of take for granted because they've been part of our practice for 30 years. When we're seeing people going, I never thought about it that way, we're like, oh, well, maybe we should talk about that kind of stuff more, because that's not as common as we thought. So thank you for everybody who's doing that. Y'all are amazing. If you're over at Creations Paths and you have a few dollars you can pass our way, you can think about joining a membership over there. That helps us keep the lights on, keep food on our table, and a roof over our heads. You can also support us on Patreon and Ko-fi. I am C. Dorset on both. If you don't have any money and you want to support us, all you have to do is share what we are doing with other people. We really want this to grow. We're not doing this for the money, though we would like to be able to call this our full-time job so that we can really put all of our energy and effort into doing this and making this the best that we can. But we really are very passionate about the message, and getting it to the most people that we can is so helpful, especially when I see those comments of like, oh, I never thought about it like that. That changes things. That helps out. Thank you so much. Those aren't just like for feeding my ego. Like, that's why we are doing this, is to help people find stuff that they are not normally exposed to. So thank you to everybody who shares. That means the world to us. So as we are on our way out, it's going to be a controversial one. Dear Sister Bodily Death, you are with us throughout life, and you help us more than we know as you kill various diseases and harms that enter our body. Life could not live without death. From the food that we consume to the diseases that are wiped out within us, you sustain us, and when it is our time to go, you take our hands and lead us on to the realm of the ancestors. Be with us in this time as we think about those who have taken your hand and gone on before us, and help us to find the strength and the wisdom to understand how we can connect and reconnect with them. Amen.
Amen.